You lied to everyone in this city, including me.
I never lied. I just never explained. There's a difference, and you're about to learn it.
Explain this. Right now, I don't know who you are.
Ask why I never told you before you decide I'm guilty of something I never did.
This ring is the seal of the trust you've chased for a year.
Then I sued the one woman my company has needed all along.
Monday morning, 8:40, Empire City Superior Court. London Sinclair climbed the marble steps in a plain gray coat, her low heels echoing louder than she wanted them to. Reporters lined the sidewalk behind her, cameras already rolling, because the docket had leaked overnight. Cho Dynasty Holdings versus London Sinclair. Fraud. Breach of contract. $50 million in damages. Inside, Julian Cho stood at the plaintiff's table in a charcoal suit that cost more than her rent for a year. His jaw was tight. His eyes tracked her the way a man watches a fire he lit and can no longer control. 6 weeks ago, he had looked at her like she was the only person in Empire City worth looking at. Now he looked at her like a stranger wearing a familiar face. "Miss Sinclair," his attorney said, loud enough for the gallery, "we intend to prove you orchestrated this entire relationship to defraud my client's company." A woman in the gallery whispered the word gold digger, just loud enough to carry. London set her bag down slowly. She did not flinch. She reached up and touched the small silver ring on her right hand, the one with a compass rose worn smooth by 30 years of someone else's thumb before hers. Nobody in that courtroom knew what the ring actually was. Not even Julian. By the time she left the courthouse that afternoon, her boss at Palmer Row Legal Aid had already called twice, voice tight with panic, because a camera crew was parked outside the clinic. Her landlord had slipped a notice under her door about a missed payment, even though she had never missed one in 4 years. One lawsuit, and the whole careful life she had built to look ordinary was cracking open in public. She could end it with a single phone call to her own attorney. One document, produced at the right time, would make Julian Cho's fraud case collapse before it started. She didn't make the call. Not yet. Because if she pulled that ring out now in anger to save herself, she would never know the truth she needed most. Had he ever loved her, or only the version of her that owned nothing? 6 weeks earlier, Julian had walked into Palmer Row without an appointment, without his usual driver, wearing a plain jacket instead of a suit. His company had spent a year trying to buy the block through a shell entity called Meridian Land Partners, and the owner behind it, a private trust he'd only ever seen written as S. Legacy Holdings, had refused every offer without explanation. He wanted to see the block himself before his board forced him to walk away. He found London kneeling on the clinic floor, helping a 70-year-old tenant named Mr. Delacroix organize eviction paperwork that had nothing to do with Julian's deal and everything to do with her patients. She didn't recognize him. He didn't announce himself. For one afternoon he was just a man asking good questions, and she was just a woman who answered them honestly. When Mr. Delacroix asked Julian bluntly what he did for a living, Julian said only that he moved buildings around for a living, and London laughed so hard she had to set her coffee down. She told him later that she liked that he hadn't led with his job, his car or his college, the way most men in nice shoes did the moment they walked into Palmer Row. He told her he liked that she corrected his grammar on a lease clause without even looking up. They kept meeting after that. Coffee that turned into dinner. Dinner that turned into long walks along the Empire City waterfront, where he told her quietly about his father, a respected builder and soul who had been publicly ruined years ago by a partner who forged his signature on a fraudulent loan. "I watched cameras follow my father out of a courtroom like he was already guilty," Julian said one night, watching the water instead of her. "I promised myself I would never let anyone make a fool of my family again. Not once. Not ever." London filed that promise away like a warning she didn't yet understand applied to her. Once, when Julian complained about a stubborn trust downtown that wouldn't return his calls, she said without thinking that maybe the trust wasn't being stubborn, maybe it was protecting the exact families a redevelopment would push out. He'd laughed and called her a natural negotiator. Neither of them noticed she was describing her own decision. The trouble started with Una Park, Julian's executive vice president of acquisitions, and the only person besides his lawyers who had watched him fall for a woman with no visible income and no explanation for it. Una had spent 6 years beside Julian, absorbing his silences, memorizing his coffee order, waiting for a door that never opened. Watching it open for a stranger from a legal aid clinic broke something in her that she told herself was concern for the company. She dug into London's background and found exactly what she was looking for, because she built it herself. Bank transfers rerouted through a shell account. A forged email thread suggesting London had been secretly negotiating a second buyer to inflate the Palmer Row price behind Julian's back. A photograph of London's ring zoomed and circled, with a note calling it consistent with notarization seals used in shell trust fraud. Enough smoke to make a frightened man believe there was fire. Julian didn't ask London a single question before he believed it. He simply stopped calling. 3 days later, he had her served in front of her co-workers. If you've ever been judged by what you didn't have instead of who you actually were, tell me where you're watching this from right now, because London's story is about to get a lot more complicated. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the moment you're about to see changes everything you think you know about her. When Julian finally agreed to see her, 1 week before trial, he slid the forged documents across a conference table like evidence at a crime scene. "Explain this," he said. Not a question. An accusation wearing a question's punctuation. "Do you actually believe I could do that to you?" London asked. "I believed a lot of things 4 days ago." She could have ended it there. She could have told him exactly who she was, exactly what she owned, exactly why the trust had never sold. Instead she stood, buttoned her coat, and said the only true thing she had left. "If I hand you the proof right now, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you fell for me, or for what I own. I'd rather you spend 1 more week wondering if you were wrong." She walked out before he could answer. What is a woman protecting when the truth would save her, and she chooses silence anyway? Ask yourself that, because the answer is coming, and it isn't what either of them expects. Like this video if you're already picking a side, and comment who you trust more right now, Julian or London. 2 days before trial, Odessa Marsh walked into the courthouse as London's newly filed co-counsel, 61 years old, reading glasses pushed into silver locks, carrying a leather satchel like it was armed. Odessa had been London's late mother's best friend, and the attorney quietly managing the Sinclair family trust for 11 years. She stood up in the pretrial hearing and calmly informed the court that the bank timestamps on Cho Dynasty's key evidence didn't match the account's actual creation date by 14 months. The prosecution's lead attorney went pale. Julian went very still. Everything is different now, and nobody in that room could say exactly how yet, only that the fraud case built to destroy London Sinclair had a hole in it large enough to walk through. Reporters who had shown up to watch a gold digger exposed started asking Julian's team different questions. Was the evidence verified before the lawsuit was filed? Who had provided it? Julian, unsettled for the first time since this began, did something he hadn't done in 4 days. He asked his own investigator to check Una's timeline instead of trusting it. He showed up at Palmer Row that evening without his lawyers, without a camera crew, in the same plain jacket he'd worn the day they met. "Mr. Delacroix saw him first from the stoop next door and didn't say a word, just watched, the way the whole block had learned to watch anyone who came near their homes with money in their pocket. London found Julian sitting on the clinic steps like a man who no longer knew which version of himself to be. "My father never got a chance to defend himself before the cameras decided he was guilty," Julian said quietly. "I told myself I'd never let that happen to someone I built something with. Then I did it to you in 6 days without asking you a single honest question first. I told myself I was protecting the company. I think I was really just protecting the part of myself that's still 12 years old, watching my father's name get dragged through a courtroom on the evening news." "I know exactly why you did it," London said. "That doesn't mean it didn't cost me something real." He nodded, and for the first time in a week he didn't argue. She almost told him everything that night. She didn't. Because a woman had already forged one story about her to protect a deal, and London had learned the hard way what happens when the truth arrives before the trust to hold it. 2 days later, Una felt the ground moving under her, and did what frightened people with something to lose often do. She leaked a story to a tabloid claiming London had a prior fraud judgment in another state, a complete fabrication, and quietly pressured a junior bank analyst to delete a server backup that would have proven when the falsified documents were actually created. She told the analyst it was routine housekeeping. She told herself the same thing. Neither version was true, and some small, honest part of her already knew it, the same part that used to believe 6 years of loyalty would eventually be enough. She miscalculated only one thing. Odessa had already subpoenaed a mirrored copy 3 days earlier, the moment she noticed the timestamps didn't sit right. The court moved the remaining proceedings up by a week, at the prosecution's own nervous request, because now 2 separate law firms wanted this resolved before it got worse for everyone except London. What happens when the person who built a lie realizes the lie is the only thing left standing between her and everything she wanted? You're about to find out, and it is bigger than anyone in that courtroom is ready for. Comment your prediction below, and subscribe if you want to see her walk out of that courtroom with her name finally clean. On the final day, Odessa rose and placed 3 items on the evidence table: a 30-year-old trust document, a certified forensic report, and a small velvet box. Inside was a wax seal stamp, its face an exact match to the compass rose on London's ring. "This ring is not jewelry," Odessa told the court. "It is the authentication seal of the Sinclair Legacy Trust, created by London's mother to preserve affordable housing across 3 Empire City neighborhoods, including Palmer Row. My client is the sole trustee. My client is S. Legacy Holdings." The gallery erupted into sound. Julian's own outside counsel flipped frantically through a year of correspondence addressed, always to the trustee of S. Legacy Holdings, a name he had signed cover letters to a dozen times without once learning the person behind it. He had spent a year trying to reach the one woman his company needed most, and had already fallen in love with her before either of them knew it. Odessa wasn't finished. The forensic report traced the falsified bank documents to a device registered to Una Park's assistant, activated the same week London and Julian's relationship became public inside the company. Motive, means, and now proof laid out in a single afternoon. Una stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "I was protecting this company," she said, and her voice cracked on the word protecting, because even she no longer fully believed it. "You were protecting yourself," Julian said. It was the first time he had spoken to her like that in 6 years. Odessa, closing her folder with the calm of a woman who had waited 11 years to say this next line, added only, "And you did it in the one building in Empire City where paper doesn't lie, even when people do." Somewhere in the gallery someone actually laughed, a short startled sound, because it was true and because everyone needed to breathe. He stood, walked to the defense table where his own lawyer sat frozen, and told the court on record that Cho Dynasty Holdings was withdrawing every claim against London Sinclair, effective immediately. The judge, unimpressed by a man who had sued first and verified never, reminded him plainly that a signature on a lawsuit is not proof, and that an apology in a hallway does not undo a public accusation. Julian didn't argue with that either. Una was escorted out to face her own charges, forgery and fraud, in the very courthouse she had used to try to end someone else's reputation. The cameras that came for a scandal about London Sinclair left with a very different story, and for the first time in 3 weeks, none of it was a lie. Julian didn't ask for forgiveness that day. He knew better now than to expect it on his own timeline. Instead, 3 days later, he held a press conference alone, no lawyers beside him, and said her name clearly. "I accused London Sinclair publicly without asking her one honest question privately. That failure is mine alone. I let an old fear decide who I trusted, and it cost a good woman her peace for 3 weeks she will never get back." He announced Cho Dynasty Holdings would fund the next 5 years of Palmer Row's housing protections, in her name, whether she ever spoke to him again or not. She didn't call him for 11 days. When she finally did, it wasn't to say she forgave him. It was to say she'd seen him quietly show up at 3 tenant meetings that month without a single reporter knowing he'd been there, standing in the back, never once trying to be thanked. Actions, not headlines, were the only currency she still trusted, and he had started paying in the right one. They rebuilt it slowly, the way anything worth keeping usually gets rebuilt. Not with a single grand gesture, but with a year of small ones nobody photographed. He learned to ask before he assumed. She learned that letting someone see the whole truth wasn't the same as losing control of it. Some weeks they only spoke as business partners, finishing the Palmer Row protections properly, on her terms, with her name finally on the paperwork instead of a shell. Other weeks felt like the beginning again, careful and unhurried, the way it should have been from the start. The following spring, Palmer Row reopened its expanded clinic under a new plaque that finally read, "For the first time in public, the Sinclair Legacy Trust." London stood on those same courthouse-adjacent steps. No reporters shouting fraud this time, just neighbors and Mr. Delacroix in his good hat, and Odessa pretending not to cry while dabbing her eyes with a court document. Julian stood beside her, close enough to matter, careful enough not to make it about him. She turned the compass rose ring once around her finger, the way she always did when something important was about to be true out loud. "Ask me again who I am," she said. "I already know," Julian said. "I just wish I'd asked before I decided I already knew." She smiled, the first easy, unguarded smile Empire City had ever seen on her. And for once, nobody was watching her steps to count what she might be hiding. There was nothing left to hide. She was never poor. She was only ever protected, careful, and finally on her own terms seen. If someone ever misjudged you by what you didn't have instead of who you actually were, tell London in the comments how you proved them wrong, because she wants to know she's not the only one. Subscribe to Empire City Romance Stories for a new emotional drama every single week. Hit like if this story earned it, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. We'll see you in the next story.